A central pillar of Deltarune's story is its mysterious dark fountains that allow us to explore its fantasy-like worlds. But what exactly is a dark fountain? Dark fountains are known to be a swirling, fluid-like energy that emit from the ground and transport anyone who steps into them to a connected world of the fountain's own making. Today we're learning the science behind what a dark fountain actually is, and ultimately how there's much more to the grand fountain than we know. Cause here we figure out the tricks behind what makes something work. We are the ones who dare to stress our brains to solve gaming's biggest mysteries, and get the awkward stares because we enjoy thinking about things rather than just obediently slugging along. Deltarune has had a total of 4 fountains appearing so far, being the Grand Fountain that towers above Castletown and is connected to the school supply closet, the Eastern Fountain in Chapter 1 that connects to the school's unused classroom, Chapter 2's fountain in the library, and Chapter 3's fountain in Toriel's house. Each dark fountain acts as a sort of power source that gives life and form to its dark world, as that dark world can only exist as long as the fountain does, and bases its world and life off of whatever space and objects it happened to swallow upon its creation. Upon being created, a dark fountain takes the form of an opaque black fog that fills the surrounding space before turning into a swirling beam of light that interestingly seems to alternate its color while having the same exact pattern as the game's Goner Maker opening, where the player must attempt to make their own perfect vessel as they're guided by some sort of apparent supernatural entity. To figure out what a dark fountain is, we need to examine what they actually do. How do they actually create entire worlds and in such tiny spaces? Looking at how worlds or entire universes come into existence and the forces that create them in the first place, we come to the seemingly supernatural forces of dark energy and dark matter, with substances like dark energy holding the key for how entire universes are created from apparently nothing. You see, while the Big Bang Theory accounts for how the known universe evolved to what we see today, it's not a telling for how or why the universe came into existence in the first place, and now scientists believe that something must have happened before. Enter inflation theory. Inflation theory, while solving the Big Bang's problems, shows that when a new universe is first created, it balloons up into existence everywhere at once, in an insanely short amount of time. I mean in somewhere like a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second. And not only that, but scientists soon realized that while inflation has stopped in some areas of space, it could have continued eternally in others. This means that whatever area of space inflation has stopped is able to form into its own bubble or pocket universe, complete with its own laws of physics, while it continues endlessly elsewhere in a theory called eternal inflation. While this gets really cool and really intense to study, we can indeed look at each dark world as its own pocket universe, or even dimension, where most physics and things like the law of gravity generally remain the same, that can and does balloon into existence in mere moments. So what about dark fountains is causing these pocket universes to form, and how do they occupy such small spaces? This brings us to what might be the most interesting element in this science video known as dark energy. While dark matter is thought to attract things together, dark energy is thought to expand things apart and be gravitationally repulsive, meaning that whenever a dark world is created, it is possibly being inflated into existence by dark energy itself. And many could think that the fountains themselves are a swirling form of dark energy that when taken away cause their pocket universe to collapse, which while close to the answer, the actual answer to what they are is much more bizarre. And not to mention, how does a dark world when suddenly ballooned into existence take up only a tiny amount of space in the Lightner's world, but end up as a large world in and of itself? Well, one way is, while the fountain itself would engulf and occupy the surrounding space that it's created in, the dark world itself would have to fold or curve a section of space and time to where it wraps around other sections of itself, creating a pocket reality that is much bigger on the inside than the outside, which might first look like a bubble, but could be theoretically folded or shaped into pretty much anything, just like how a higher dimension would fold around itself, making it extremely tiny in our universe, but quite large when you step into it, that we go over in another video when we detail the godlike powers that Gaster receives when traveling through these higher dimensions. As for how the fountains happen to assimilate whatever is in the room and use it to create another world full of living characters is another story, and unfortunately there's very little actual scientific evidence for how it would turn something like a doll into a living person. However, we know from Queen that they are well aware of how how long the world has been in existence, as Queen remarks on how the night created the cyber world today. And it seems like since every character is created from an item or thing that was present in the light world where its respective fountain was made, that the history of that item simply carries over to the dark world, becoming the backstory for the darkner it turns into, such as a previously successful 1997 ad campaign turned into spam emails that resides on a library computer becoming Spamton. Lightners are also shown to be able to open up dark fountains at will by focusing their determination into a sharp object and piercing the ground, and so far Chris has closed several dark fountains by also using their determination, which also collapses the dark world that was being created and being sustained by the dark-like energy coming off the fountain, which means that unlike our world, dark worlds could have a constant gravitational force acting on their boundaries, forcing them to collapse, if it wasn't for the fountain's energy keeping them open. So what is a dark fountain? We know that the dark fountains both create and act as a portal to these folded pocket universes that may be inflated by something akin to a burst of dark energy, where each fountain interestingly then holds its swirling shape and never closes unless it's forced to. Taking into account these factors leads us to one strange possibility. Dark fountains must be functioning wormholes, and since they can remain open indefinitely, they are sustained by an extremely impossible substance. Our universe holds a key principle that the total amount of energy in it is pretty much zero at all times. This is because matter, which is positive, is always negatively counteracted by gravity and dark matter, which hold everything together. Everything in the universe has its own antiparticle, with electrons having positrons, and photons, which we examine to discover Gaster's insane Deltarune experiment, are actually their own antiparticle, making their net charge neutral. Because gravity and dark matter are a constant in our universe, it's extremely rare for something like a wormhole to stay open for any amount of time, except in astronomically rare instances where the wormhole was made out of something that could emit enough dark or rather negative energy of its own to hold it open. Scientists have coined this nearly impossible substance as exotic matter. Exotic matter is a substance that essentially has negative mass and gives off negative energy that, like dark energy, is gravitationally repulsive, which could stabilize a wormhole. And the real kicker here is that while scientists say that exotic matter could not exist in a solid form as it would violate the theory of relativity, exotic matter would have to exist in a fluid-like state for it to be real, where it could move and swirl around much like the dark fountains that we see in Deltarune, which leads us to one bizarre conclusion about the nature of dark fountains. After spending hours researching things like how can a pocket dimension exist within our own world, I was hit with forums of people debating string theory, the meaning of the word impossible, and somehow ended up on forums of people saying that they simply believe in Narnia. But now, let's look at what secret we finally uncovered about the Grand Dark Fountain and its true effects on those who surround it. We know that darkners cannot survive or hold their form without being near a dark fountain, or more so the negative energy radiating from the one they were specifically created from, as we see characters like Lancer, who come from the Eastern Fountain that is now closed, turn into stone when in the cyber world. This is, however, with the exception of the Grand Dark Fountain, the only one that, according to Rousey, is supposed to be standing, allows life from other fountains to exist when in its presence, and possibly allows darkners created from it, like Rousey, to stray away without a problem, as we see Rousey join the rest of the gang in the cyber world. Rousey explains that this is because anyone who strays from a lesser fountain to another might not belong to that fountain and therefore turns to stone, while the Grand Fountain is made up of pure darkness, allowing anyone to exist within its presence. And from what we've seen, Rousey is telling the truth, as other characters have moved from their collapsed worlds into the bounds of the Grand Fountain, and so far players have speculated that because Rousey, who is apparently the only one to come from the Grand Dark Fountain, doesn't turn into stone, must mean that he is just compatible with any fountain. But what if it was more than that? That there's something much more grand about this fountain when compared to the others? Well, scientists have thought of exotic matter as having far more powerful backwards properties of normal matter. We really don't know much more about its properties, and given that Deltarune is even more magical as it is scientific, what if the Grand Dark Fountain doesn't just sustain its own creations like the other fountains, but brings about a more permanent change? So far, Rousey Rousey has stumped players by him somehow knowing the entire layout of the school in detail, has made the long trek from Castletown to Cyberworld after hearing what was happening in a suspiciously short amount of time, as if he actually took a different route, and as shown in my Deltarune Teeth theory, not only knows of the player's existence, but also knows their name. It may be possible that Darkners made out of pure darkness are truly alive, in the sense that they can move around as much as they please, just as Lightners can, not being bound to any one space. Rousey doesn't just know the layout of the school, but possibly the entire town, of which he can freely move around, and eventually follow Chris and the others through the fountain in the library, rather than making something like a multi-marathon sprint from Castletown to Cyberworld. But if none of this was very convincing, then I saved a very interesting piece of evidence for last. One of the genius scientist W.D. Gaster's quotes was where he said, "The darkness keeps growing, the shadows cutting deeper, photons reading negative," which is interesting because photons are electrically neutral, because unlike other particles, photons are their own antiparticle and are present literally everywhere, except when it comes to objects like black holes and objects made out of exotic matter that spread dark, or rather negative energy, that Gaster was studying in Undertale. If you want to learn about Gaster's connections to the Dark Fountains, then watch this video, and subscribe if you love learning.